So the 49ers, who lost the Super Bowl, needed to make a change, apparently. And they needed to make a change when it comes to the defensive side of the football. And that change came by way of Steve Wilks, the defensive coordinator, being fired by the San Francisco 49ers. Now, I don't think anybody would necessarily put the Super Bowl loss on Steve Wilks, but if you look at the season in total, there was a lot of tea leaves that were left that maybe they were heading towards a departure at the end of the year, because Kyle Shanahan openly was critical of the defense. He asked Steve Wilks to come down and coach from the sideline and not the booth. Like, there was some speculation that things weren't A-okay when it came to Steve Wilks there in San Francisco. So Kyle Shanahan, the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, discussed the firing of his D coordinator yesterday.
This morning, I relieved Steve Wilks of his duties. Going to end up making a change here, defensive coordinator. And really tough decision, because really says nothing about Steve as a man or as a football coach. I mean, he's exactly what we wanted as a man. He is a great football coach. But just where we're going and where we're at with our team from a scheme standpoint and things like that, looking through it all throughout the year, through these last few days, I felt pretty strongly that this was a decision that was best for our organization. And even though it was one I didn't want to make, it was something that once I realized that I think a different direction is what's best for our organization, and then it's something that I have to do.
So Kyle Shanahan talking about his decision to fire defensive coordinator Steve Wilks yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, how you feel about it?
I mean, I'm just not surprised. And I know that people will look at it and go, well, he's the fall guy. Like, Steve Wilks is the fall guy. He's the scapegoat, et cetera, et cetera. But again, if you followed along, their defense took a step back. Like, there was a feeling that they had a significant drop-off after DeMeco Ryans. And the idea that Kyle Shanahan is just in the business of blaming their issues on their coordinators. Like, Kyle Shanahan's assistants get head coaching jobs. DeMeco Ryans, Robert Saleh, Mike McDaniel. Like, he's got a track record of working with and finding great coordinators. It just didn't work. The fit didn't work. And I think that this was always a possibility based on what was happening during the course of the season, stuff that was public with his criticism, Steve Wilks. You even saw late in that game, I think it was the final drive of regulation. It might have been overtime, where Kyle Shanahan ran down the field to call a timeout because he didn't like the look the Niners were in on defense. Like, it just felt like we were headed here at some point when it came to Steve Wilks and Kyle Shanahan.
Well, you said it. I feel you said it correctly at the beginning of your statement. There had to be a fall guy. For as well as Kyle Shanahan has done, for as much of a offensive mind and brilliant man as he's been as a coach, he hasn't been able to win the biggest game. And the record with Andy Reid is abysmal. And so when you get into a situation where you feel as though you have to have a response to why you're coming up short, you got to keep in mind, they should have lost the first two games. I continue to say that. In the playoff run, they should have lost against Green Bay. They should have lost to Detroit. And a lot of the reasons why we looked at them losing those games, or should have lost those games, is because they couldn't stop a nosebleed. Both teams were able to successfully access the outside of the 49ers defense. Aaron Jones had an amazing day. Gibbs had, was it Jahmyr Gibbs?
Yeah.
The Detroit Lions were able to run the ball, and they were able to access the center of that defense. You were able to block defensive ends consistently with receivers. That's unheard of. You're blocking. Like, I can say, honestly say, I have seen crackback blocks that have worked in the history of the game. But when you have a receiver coming down and shielding a defensive end, and that defensive end yields to a receiver, there's something wrong. I know we joke about the CBR and this, that, and the other. That was real. That's very real. If you're playing disciplined football, and I know people will laugh like, oh, LaVar, you're known for not playing disciplined football. Kick rocks. Kick rocks.
Who said that?
It was a horrible narrative that was made about me.
Damn.
It was undisciplined football. It was unenthused football. And you had to know that if something were to go wrong, if they had lost that game to Green Bay, Steve Wilks was going to be fired. If they lost that game to Detroit, Steve Wilks was going to be fired. They lose eventually in the Super Bowl, and what was a defensive struggle, their defense showed up and played ball. But it wasn't good enough at the end of the game when Patrick Mahomes was able to maneuver and they were able to get down the field and score the necessary points to win the game. You had to know that the defense was going to be the blame, even though you can look at offensive woes and make it a very easy argument that it's been their offense that was holding them back. When the injuries took place during the regular season, it was the offense that struggled. We blamed it on post-concussion symptoms for Brock Purdy having the type of games that he had. We blamed it on Trent Williams not being in, which is very legit, but we blamed it on a lot of things. What we didn't do was blame it on Kyle Shanahan. So to me, you buy yourself some time by firing Steve Wilks and taking the focal point of any other woes or ailments of what may have led to them coming up short in the Super Bowl. But at some point, there's got to be a matter of time before that judgment is on the head coach solely. I heard Rob, I was listening to The Odd Couple. Rob Parker said they should fire Kyle Shanahan.
Of course he did. I mean,
and I think it's at this moment, it's an outrageous notion, 100%. But is it? At some point, do you have to start having the conversation of, with the type of team that has been assembled?
If Tom Brady blew a snot rocket on television, Rob Parker would say he should be arrested.
I mean, like I wouldn't go that far.
Like, it's just,
I mean, but at some point, if the idea is you're putting it all on the line, you make the trade for Christian McCaffrey. I'm
a woman.
Oh no. Oh no.
Oh.
I ain't paying for that. All I know is, at some point, the conversation has to come around to where is your head coach deficient, and maybe it did come around. Maybe maybe this was a direct response to. Maybe there's an internal criticism of he could have did better. And he took that as me having to have done better. I need to make better decisions on who's leading our team and who's leading our units. You know, and I can't say that, you know, people say, oh, I feel bad for Steve Wilks. He's the fall guy, this, that, and the other. Sometimes the price of success is a ton of scrutiny. And when you have a ton of scrutiny on you, and you have a microscope on you because you're having great success. With great success comes great responsibility. And you have to deal with what comes your way when those things take place. So, you know, I wish Steve Wilks, I wish him luck, but this was one of those scenarios. You saw the way their defense played towards the end of the season. You saw the way that they played in the playoffs. And that's what it, you know, to me, that's what it kind of led to.
Yeah. I mean, I look at it and I go, any issues they had in the playoffs, I think majority of it was on defense. Like, I just think they were getting gashed by Detroit. They were getting gashed by Green Bay. They played well against the Niners, but, I mean, Brady, as we were talking about, like, this, if you had paid close enough attention, I think this was always on the table at the end of the year with Steve Wilks.
I mean, first year for a defensive coordinator and a top 10 defense through the course of the regular season. I don't know that it was always on the table. I think you're kind of more curious to see how things are going to work themselves out. But I think because of the way the defense finished, and in particular, if you looked at the adjustments that were made in the second half of the Super Bowl, and that kind of highlighted more of an issue is when they needed help, when they needed stops from their defense, it wasn't there. And that group is extremely talented, at least on paper. You look at all the guys they've drafted in the first round, all the pieces they've put on that side of the ball, and when you can't get a stop when you need it most, I don't know that if it's Josh Allen, if it's Lamar Jackson, whoever you're going to face from the AFC side, in the Super Bowl, Joe Burrow, Aaron Rodgers. I mean, you're not going to be able to stop them. So there was small blips along the way, the 3-game losing streak. I think you saw some of that, the Baltimore, beat down in Santa Clara, that kind of raised your eyebrows a little bit going, wait a second, I can't stop these guys. I'm about to see them in the Super Bowl. This might be a Super Bowl preview. And then once they got into the playoffs, it felt like they were constantly limping along. So I can't say that I wasn't surprised, because I was surprised that 1 year into it, a top 10 defense, and they wouldn't try to work with this and move forward. But, I'm sure you touched on it, Jonas, asking him to move down from the box and the different things that kind of came out along the way led to some frustration maybe on where this defense was at based on what it could potentially be. But they've got a lot of work to do. If you look at their defensive front, Chase Young's a free agent, Javon Kinlaw's a free agent. I believe they got one other up front too, opposite of Bosa. I think maybe Randy Gregory is too. So they've got a lot of decisions to make up front to figure out how to replace that group and kind of build around Eric Armstead and Nick Bosa.
Yeah, so it's we'll see what the offseason holds for the 49ers. Let me ask you guys this. If they won that game on Sunday, does Steve Wilks get fired?
No.
I mean, they're also that leads to that there has to be a scapegoat, and there's like one of 3 scapegoats I guess you can point to, right? Everyone wants to use the PAT as that was the difference in the game. Okay, maybe it was, but it wasn't like it was a maybe you want to say it was a bad snap. Wasn't that the one that was a little high and it took a little extra time getting it down, and so maybe the kick was a little low, but it's like he got the kick off. Do you blame it on the even though that was a huge play in the game that maybe altered the outcome of the game? I don't know if there's like one individual person that you're looking at blaming. So if that's the case, like people look to blame or point the blame elsewhere. Are you going to put on Brock Purdy? I don't know that he played a game where you think that way. I mean, he got down in overtime and got points. So that's, I'm not sure that's the case. It feels like it was, if you're going to point a finger, an easier finger to point, because of the adjustments that KC made the second half and into overtime,